All right, everybody. Very welcome to Philosapiens, where religion meets reason. So we are back with another stream, and not the stream that you would have expected, or what we said that mostly will do, which is Mohammad Ijab's episode number 2 of review of his stream or his lecture, or however you want to call it. But anyways, so this is a new stream for Philosapiens, and then we decided that we are going to do um, a debate review between William Lane Craig and Alex O'Connor that happened on Unbelievable, I guess. What is that channel called? Unbelievable, whatever it is, right? So yeah, I think that debate I thought was pretty interesting, and so we picked it up, and then we'll jump right in. Before we do that, welcome Madan and welcome Kelly. How are you two doing?
Very good, to
All
be
well,
honest. Very
all
good.
well.
All good. Let's
All
just
is
jump
well.
And
into it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Madan's voice is appearing very crisp and clear, right, everybody? So
Yeah.
whoever can hear Madan very crisp and clear, just give a thumbs up.
Yeah. I no longer
So
need to exaggerate my voice by adding an echo and speaking loudly. I can just speak in this calm tone.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, no
the
curiosity. Just be
Madan
myself.
2.0 is here, guys.
Yeah.
All right. So without any further ado, let's add this. I think I'm not quite sure to what point we should forward this. Maybe up until somewhere over here. Let's see.
Severe laryngitis, completely lost my voice. And it looked like pardon me, I'd probably be coughing. But I've got my in worship and love and obedience. And the reason you should do that is obvious, because God is the supreme benefactor. He is the source of eternal life, the source of forgiveness and salvation. So clearly you should believe in God. But I think Johnny's real question is, well, but why believe that God exists? You can't believe in God if you don't believe that God exists. And in my philosophical work, I've defended both what I call exterior and interior ways of answering that question. Exterior arguments and evidences concern philosophical and scientific arguments that lead to the existence of God. For example, I've defended 6 of these in my work. First, that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists, rather than nothing. Second, that God is the best explanation for the absolute beginning of the universe at a point in the finite past. Thirdly, God is the best explanation for the uncanny applicability of mathematics to the physical phenomena. Fourth, God is the best explanation for the incomprehensible fine-tuning of the universe for embodied interactive life. Fifth, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, sixth, the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists. Now, together, I think these 6 arguments constitute a powerful cumulative case that God exists. If you were to ask me why I believe the Christian God exists, then we would need to go beyond these arguments to examine the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Who was this man, Jesus of Nazareth? And I believe that he claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, the Son of God in a unique sense, and the divine human Son of Man, prophesied by the prophet Daniel. And I think that God vindicated those radical personal claims by which he put himself in God's place by raising him from the dead. Now, I realize that most people think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just believe in by faith or not. But in fact, there are 4 well-established historical facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth that are agreed upon by the vast majority of New Testament scholars that have written on this subject. And these would include, first, his honorable interment by Joseph of Arimathea in a tomb following his crucifixion. Secondly, the tomb was discovered on the first day of the week following the crucifixion by a group of Jesus' female followers to be empty. Third, the rather various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death on various occasions and under a variety of circumstances. And finally, number 4 is that the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. And I think that when the alternative explanations for those facts are weighed by the usual criteria that historians use for evaluating historical hypotheses, then the superiority and plausibility of what I call the resurrection hypothesis emerges. That is, that the original disciples were right, that God had raised Jesus from the dead. And so for that reason, I am enthusiastically a Christian theist. Now, so much for the exterior way. Down through history, most Christians haven't believed in God on that basis. The vast majority of Christians, like a medieval peasant, farmer, or someone working in the rice fields of Laos, don't have the education or the library resources or the leisure time to look into philosophical arguments for God's existence or the evidence for the New Testament. Rather, they believe in God on the basis of a personal experience of God himself. In particular, they've experienced the risen Lord in their lives. The Easter hymn writer says, "Have you asked me how I know he lives? He lives within my heart." And I think that that is a perfectly valid way. So even though I am an enthusiastic proponent of evidentiary exterior arguments for the truth of Christian faith, I don't think they're necessary. I think that it's perfectly rational to take belief in Christianity as a properly basic belief grounded in our personal experience of God himself.
So I think right off the bat, I think William Lane Craig has accepted that. Should I say that any philosophical or evidentiary argument is pretty much futile, if I sense his response correctly, because you don't really need any arguments to be convinced. And if you just have an experience, whether you are a Buddhist, you have maybe, let's suppose there is a world where there is a concept of God in Buddhism. You have that experience of whatever you call nirvana or anything, and you start believing in that. That's perfectly fine. If you're a Muslim, if you feel that connection with Allah, you're perfectly fine believing in Allah, that creator. So what I sense here, Craig is saying, is that it doesn't matter. As long as you have an experience, you can believe in that experience. And in particular, he's probably saying it's my experience is probably more correct than your experience. You can have an experience probably for, if you're a Hindu, maybe, then you have an experience with Vishnu or maybe Brahma or whatever you feel the deities exist. And you're perfectly on your own right to believe in that, and that probably is the truth for you. So if that's the low bar that you have to pass in believing in something, I think I'm not quite okay agreeing with WLC over there, right? Even though, despite he says that there are some strong arguments or for believing in Christian God, I still think that his main reason for believing may not be those arguments, and he would be willing to shed away those arguments if they come out to be untrue. So yeah, I think that's my initial take on this. I think what we'll do is we'll tackle these arguments one by one. Whatever he has mentioned. He's mentioned, of course, fine-tuning argument. He has mentioned Kalam cosmological argument, and maybe few other. I think he brought one very common Christian argument as well, right? There is the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? So that's one of the primary argument that is used by Christian theologians or apologists, right? So we'll tackle those as well. But before that, I think I'll let Madan Akhali jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at what. So the title is "Does God Exist?" And sorry, what is the title of the debate? It's God and suffering.
does God exist?
So
God and suffering. I mean,
so
for our stream, I made a
no. I'm talking about the actual debate. So it says God and suffering, but I think the major concern that I have is right now is, I mean, in a debate, you don't just give like a list of 10 arguments and then expect the opponent to respond on all of these, right? So I'm not sure how Alex will respond to all of these, and because he's listed down 6 arguments. On each of these arguments, you could spend maybe at least an hour, I think more than that, and
yeah,
then
totally.
he has spent 5 more minutes to further explain his view on why he thinks Jesus is God. And again, he has given, so, and I think if that requires even more, I mean, a few more hours to sort of discuss and deconstruct. So I'm not sure how this debate is going to work. I've not heard this.
Yeah,
This in person.
I'm not quite sure actually. So this
I think in a
if we
debate, it's called a shotgun.
yeah yeah
I don't know what it's called. It's shotgun fallacy or shotgun approach. I don't know.
yeah sure. So I think this is we are running it from Alex O'Connor's channel, right? I think Cosmic Skeptic or Alex, I don't know which one it is, right? It's not called Cosmic Skeptic anymore, but that's the channel I'm running this from. But the debate actually originally occurred on Unbelievable channel, right? Which is that Justin Brierley's channel, right? So there, the title is Existence of God, right? So I think Alex has kept a different title. The original title in that debate is Existence of God. So we'll take that. This is, I think, he's laying out the groundwork for his opening statement, in which he's giving probably he's just throwing out different arguments for his belief in God, basically. So yeah, Madan, you have anything, or
Yeah.
else if yeah
Yeah, so I wanted to say, so he says that despite any evidence or arguments, a lot of people may not even necessarily look at the world in that manner. So the main source for a lot of Christians, like him as well, is that the real reasons or the deep-seated reasons that you've come to Christ is due to a personal experience, not necessarily argumentation, right? And I think he mentions proper basicality as well. Is that correct? Did I remember hearing that? Etc. Properly basic beliefs.
yeah
So those
properly
kind of two.
basically
Yeah. So argument from experience and properly basic beliefs, although they come together, they support one another, right? But the thing is, I think that is also an argument, right? I mean, I don't know how you can escape or how the requirement of an argument, because if William Lane Craig is challenged on the experience, he will have to support the veridicalness of the experience, right? The veracity of the experience to some extent. If somebody pushes him and says, for example, how do you know it wasn't a psychological hallucination, a mental disorder, or a lot of people imagine many things in different cultures. There's plenty of it. He will then have to somehow differentiate that the truthfulness of that experience than the other experiences. And if he does with any sense of logic or reasoning, then that would be an argument, right? So
exactly, yeah.
clearly he has to sustain. Is he just simply saying experience meh and making noise with his mouth, or does he have some sort of logic behind it? Now,
Yeah,
if he can't, let's say, justify the experience, and he doesn't provide an argument, and he says something like, "I can't explain why the experience that I've had is more truthful than a hallucination. I just believe it," then I think he's right. But we don't know exactly how he would react to that, right? So I'm not sure necessarily he doesn't have an argument. Maybe that isn't an argument. The second thing I'd say is that the argument from proper basicality or properly basic belief, or what Daniel Hakikuchi talks about as basic beliefs as well. We did a stream on Hakikuchi talking about you don't need evidence. It's very similar. What did
it's
Hakikuchi do?
also called fitra and
Fitra, yeah. What did Hakikuchi
and
do for an hour? He provided arguments why you don't need any further arguments, right? He provided, that is a form of argumentation. the irony of the situation, or the paradox, is that you need to make an argument for, like Alvin Plantinga also talks about properly basic beliefs, but he makes philosophical arguments to explain and justify why you can hold properly basic beliefs that don't require any further justification. Although that specific belief doesn't need further, if properly basic beliefs are true, although that specific belief doesn't need evidence, the argument for justifying that specific beliefs don't need evidence is an argument. Can you see that? Right? So the argument for
Right? You
some
just can't escape it,
views,
basically.
the argument that some beliefs don't need evidence is an argument itself. So you can't really escape that part.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I just want to say.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks very much. There's a lot there to unpack, and we'll park for the moment, Alex, any arguments you might have against the existence of God, and we'll park also for the moment the question of Jesus and of Christianity. I was wondering if you might be able to tackle first what Dr. Craig calls the exterior arguments for God, particularly what sounds like, you said 5 ways?
Six.
Particularly like a version of cosmological argument that he raised at the beginning.
I think the 5 ways was somebody else. Yeah. Yeah, of course, an atheist engaged in these discussions spends their time doing 2 things: providing positive reasons not to believe in God. And there's really only one popular version of that. But more often, for that reason, they spend their time responding to arguments that are put forward. So Dr. Craig has put forward 6 of these. And the atheist's job is to see whether they think that these arguments essentially hold. So, for example, Dr. Craig says that God is the best explanation of the finite past of the universe, the fact that the universe had a beginning at a moment in time. And the questions that need to be asked in response to that are, did the universe have a beginning? How would we know that it had a beginning? If it had a beginning, how do we know that it needs some kind of cause? Now, Dr. Craig is perhaps most famous for his Kalam Cosmological argument, which seeks to establish these facts, that everything which begins to exist has a cause, that the universe had a beginning, and that therefore the universe had some kind of cause. And if the universe is the totality of all space, time, and matter, then the cause of the universe must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and so on. Most attention in this argument is given to the second premise, that is, that the universe began to exist. Now, some of you may be under the apprehension that Big Bang cosmology tells us from a scientific perspective that the universe had a first moment. That is not true. The evidence for the Big Bang is evidence that sometime around 14 billion years ago, all of space-time was condensed into a really hot, really dense state. In order to get to a first moment of the universe, you need to take the observations which show that the universe is expanding, reverse them to get to the hot, dense state, and then keep going past the hot, dense state. And this is what Hawking and Penrose, Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose did in the 20th century to show that at the beginning of the universe, there was what was called a singularity. This is a genuine first moment where density goes to infinity on some models. And this would be a first moment for the universe. I just want to point out for those who are scientifically minded here, that Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking relied on some assumptions in order to extrapolate in that manner. 4 assumptions in particular, all of which have been, all of which, I have hay fever, I suppose we've all got some, all of which have been disputed by physicists, including Penrose and Hawking themselves, who've since disputed the very assumptions they relied upon to point to a singularity. And in fact, my friend Phil Halper, who was never far away from these discussions, either intellectually or physically, conducted a survey recently, 2 of them actually. The most recent one, I believe, the largest collection of physicists ever surveyed, or at least it was replicated. And the survey asked a number of questions to leading experts. And the only question that got majority consensus, at about 2/3, the only one, was that the Big Bang is not the first moment of the universe. It is a hot, dense state 14 billion years ago. We don't know if or what came before that hot state. It's simply not something that we can measure. So scientifically, we're not on sort of solid ground. But Dr. Craig is more fond, I think, of putting forward philosophical reasons why the universe must have had a beginning. And these rely on the impossibility of an actual infinite. That if the universe had an infinite past, that would mean that you would have had to traverse an infinite number of moments in order to get to the present. I think I'm fair in saying that this is one version of an argument you would give to say why we would say that the universe has a finite past. Is that, plausibly, in order to get to the present, you have to complete the past. But if the past is infinite, you'd have to complete an infinite series. You can't do that. And so you would never arrive at the present. And yet here we are at the present. Therefore, the universe had to have had some kind of beginning. There are other reasons to think that infinities of this kind can't obtain in reality. Dr. Craig is famous for relying upon David Hilbert's famous analogy or imagery of an infinite hotel, a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. And all of those rooms are full. And yet if somebody showed up to this infinite hotel and desired a room, and were told that every single room in the hotel was full, It's easy. All you have to do is tell the person in room number 1 to move to room number 2. That one's occupied, so the person in room number 2 moves to room number 3, and number 3 moves to 4, and 4 to 5, and so on. And everyone just moves up, and since it's an infinite hotel, there's always an X number for them to move into. And then the new guest just moves into room number 1. And so, as Craig has sometimes put in the past, the hotel would have to have a sign outside that says, no vacancy, rooms available. Which, of course, seems like a contradiction.
I think that man is the one who needs the cup of tea.
He never likes to talk about this.
My sympathies.
It's horrific stuff. Losing your faith in real time, it can make anybody a bit sick. The problem I see with this is that it relies upon a that might. Do we have? Are we as much as I care about Johnny, can we put him on mute? And actually, you could just leave him on mute for the rest of the evening. The problem is that these assumptions are based on intuition. It seems as though this idea that the hotel will be full and also be able to accept new guests seems like a contradiction, but it's simply not a contradiction. There are two ways in which we could understand the hotel being full. Either full means that it can take no more guests, in which case Hilbert's Hotel simply isn't full, because it can take new guests. So maybe by full, what we mean is every room is occupied. That's fine. Okay, every room is occupied, but you can also acquire new guests. That's true even in non-infinite examples. Like if I had a finite hotel and every single room was full, but if a new guest came into the room, into the hotel, I could just build a new room for them. I could say, no vacancy, like at least every room is full, and yet new guests can be admitted. So the idea that every room being full and it being impossible to admit new guests are the same thing is not true, even trivially in the case of that finite hotel. But because we're so used to them coming together, it seems that when they don't, we're in some unintuitive contradiction. But I don't think like concepts like Hilbert Hotel are contradictory so much as they're simply unintuitive. And bear in mind that when we are forced into extreme philosophical circumstances, we are very often asked to give up some of our most foundational intuitions. The Christian asks us to believe that God is one and yet three at the same time, which many people find profoundly unintuitive, and most of the time is defended as a kind of mystery of faith that we'll never properly understand. We have to put our intuitions on the shelf and accept that this must be true. In the quantum realm, we're told that particles can be particles and waves at the same time, that superposition is a thing. That superposition is a thing that that things can be in the same place, so that two things can be the same place at one time, all kinds of assumptions that don't seem to make sense. Now, I think that infinity is surely one of the kinds of pressures that we would expect to upset our intuitions in that regard. On the point of the finite universe, could the universe have an infinite past? I really like this thought about having to traverse an actually infinite number of moments in order to get to the present. Right? This is my favorite argument because it's just so intuitive. How could we arrive at the present if you had to complete an infinite to get to the present? My question is this: an infinite number of what? Because, of course, potential infinites. Jack Symes, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, hello. I'm on, aren't I? I poisoned Johnny Thompson so I could get my seat back as host. It's worked out pretty well. And for the sake of the footage, Johnny Thompson's just aged about 10 years. So I'm sorry, Alex, you were saying.
That's okay. An infinite number of what? Because it seems intuitive. You know, I was writing about the Kalam Cosmological argument recently, and I was trying to defend it. And I found myself saying, in order to get to the present, you would have to surpass an infinite number of... And then I stopped, and I thought, well, what works there?
Events.
Maybe events. What's an event? I mean, okay, so I pick up this glass, that's an event, but that event can be subdivided. It's the event of my cognizing the glass and moving my arm and lifting it up, and the friction between the fingers and the cup. Okay, so maybe just the event of, you know, the friction rubbing against the cup, but that event occurs across a period of time, and it can be further subdivided into individual moments. Like events can always be subdivided into smaller events as long as they persist through time. You can keep dividing the time in half and say that it's made up of further moments. Okay, so maybe like moments then. But what's a moment? Like, what are we actually talking about here? Are we talking about, maybe we're talking about some measure of time. Maybe we would say something like, well, take seconds, you know, or hours. That's fine. Maybe an infinite number of hours. Well, what's an hour? Of course, an hour is ultimately based on our, like, orbiting around the sun. But you could say, okay, but if the sun disappeared, we could still keep counting as if it were there and keep the timer going. Except for the fact that time doesn't work like that. And time doesn't flow at the same rate at every point in the universe. In fact, the people sat on the bottom row down here are aging more slowly than the people at the top. Congratulations. As Einstein showed us. And so I'm actually not entirely sure what things we're talking about that would need to be infinite, and therefore unable to obtain in reality in order to have an infinite past. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the intuition. It still seems like a hard pill to swallow that the universe might have been past infinite, but it's a pill that many people swallow, not discluding, by the way, a certain Greek marble sculpture you may have heard of called Aristotle, who himself made this important distinction between actual and potential infinities and thought that actual infinities were something that couldn't attain in reality. And yet Aristotle believed that the universe had an eternal past. He believed that the past stretched infinitely, it stretched infinitely into the past, that the universe did. And so it seems to me unclear. I mean, the two assumptions built into that particular point, in other words, are that actual infinities are impossible and that a past infinite universe would count as an actual infinity. Dr. Gray, I also know, is a proponent of the A theory of time. And there are, broadly speaking, two, but there are more that people talk about too. There's this A theory of time. The present is all that exists. The past does not exist. The future does not exist. All that exists is the present moment. I also have some trouble with that because I don't know what the present moment is. I don't know when it occurs or how long it lasts. It's very difficult to actually pin that down. It's like an infinitely thin barrier between the past and the present. It's very hard to pin down. The other theory is the B theory of time, which says that time is a dimension of space. Many people interpret Einstein's relativity in this way. I know Dr. Craig does not. And in doing so is in the minority of interpreters of general relativity in
All right, they have been going on for a long time, and so I thought maybe I'll just jump in and see. They have been going on for finitude of finitude of the universe, basically finiteness of the universe, of finite time before the universe began, and all those concepts, right? And so these are all the concepts probably used in mostly in Kalam cosmological argument. Now, I do see that probably Alex has already, uh, not tackled the premise number one, which is everything that begins to, whatever begins to exist has a cause, right? So he probably hasn't taken that approach. He has straight away, jumped on to premise number two, which is the universe began to exist. And so I just wanted to touch upon that first argument first, right? Or the first premise first is that the notion of beginning itself presupposes a temporal metric, right? And then if you think about it, think deeply about it, as to time itself began with the universe. That's what is the classical or is the scientific understanding as of now. And even if you ask anybody else as well, even if you went back up to Ghazali and Ibn Sina, I think they did believe that time didn't exist forever. Maybe they did, and I'm mistaken here. So, but at least let's say, for the sake of argument, that WLC's case is that time and space began with the beginning of the universe, right? Now, this falls into the circularity, and uh, so this is something that William Lane Craig tries to subvert with simultaneity of causation, basically, right? That's how he tries to avoid this circularity. And I'm not convinced, because he doesn't give any reason to believe in that. I think he just gives an example. Again, he gives an example that's of a let's say a bowling ball resting on a cushion, right? So that's a simultaneous causation. But I have, in many of my or our streams, I have challenged that question, that there is certain. I mean, of course, I know Madan and Khali disagree with me on that, and they say that you can imagine a case where that there is a ball from eternity on top of a cushion, and then the causation is it's a simultaneous causation, that the ball is pressing against the cushion and cushion is pressing against the ball, right? But yeah, at least I'm not convinced on that. So there are these two problems. Again, one more thing is that the tense theory of time cannot coherently apply beginning of to time itself without a meta time. Think about it, you know. So it's a basically a regress, pretty much, right? So that's my answer to at least this up to this point. I'm pretty sure there are more points that I could jump into it that Alex has covered, and I do agree to some of those points and probably most of those points. But since he has already covered, and this part wasn't covered by him, so I thought probably I'll just take up that premise number one. So yeah, Kelly or Mahadin, do you want to take up any of the part that Alex has brought up over here, or shall we move on?
Well, does Kylie want to speak?
Kelly, I think he has taken a water break, maybe.
Oh, that's the reason I mentioned that, just to see if he's back. But it's okay. I didn't want to disclose that to the public. But you gave it away, so there's nothing I can.
No, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. But it's okay. I didn't think Alex was really grappling with many things intensely. Rather, he was just talking about some confusions that he has regarding clarity of concepts. And that is a valid kind of approach to take. It's not invalid. It forces William Lane Craig to flesh out these concepts more in more detail. But he raises some real difficulties with time, of course, in terms of what is a moment, what is an event, definitional issues, maybe conceptual issues, but we don't really get any firm sort of robust arguments yet from him. So I don't have much to say other than kind of agree that there are some difficulties in defining an event. And I think William Lane Craig can easily circumvent that, right? By event, but he might just mean colloquially to make it easy to digest and understand by lay people. But he doesn't need to rely on the concept of an event in order to make his infinite regress argument work. That there can't be an infinite regress from past events to now. Like if the universe was everlasting of series of past events, then we won't come into existence today. By disputing or muddying the waters a little bit of what is an event, he can dismiss. William Lane Craig may feel a bit pressured to explain what an event is, but he can get rid of the concept of event entirely and just say you cannot have an infinite continuous chain of things existing at whatever level, micro level or macro level, right? Whether you can subdivide it into parts, and furthermore, whether you can subdivide those parts into further parts, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is you can't have an infinite chain of however you do it. So I don't think Alex's confusions really challenge the more deeper arguments that William Lane Craig can make. And before he pressed upon that and talked about that, he talked about general concept. It's more introductory stuff, like talking about the general argument, talking about Hilbert's Hotel, and he's just laying down the groundwork for William Lane Craig, what William Lane Craig's argument is. So we got nothing to comment about that other than that seems like a decent, accurate representation of what William Lane Craig argues. Maybe a little bit off, because William Lane Craig goes into more detail, but it's fine. But I've not heard, we don't have too much meat on the table yet for us to do any analysis.
Yeah, I do agree, and that's why I just kind of took a digression and started addressing the premise number one, because I think more or less almost everybody just grants that premise, and I think I still feel that there is some objections to be made for that premise. You just can't. I just can't grant it. Cold turkey, pretty much, right? It's
yeah. I mean, Craig. So on the first premise, Craig usually argues from one, experience, and two, a priori reasoning. It's a matter of metaphysics. So you have the empirical argument and you have the metaphysical argument. The empirical argument is simply that everywhere you look, you see things.
I think we did discuss that it assumes a strong PSR, pretty much, in a sense.
You could say so. You could say so. Maybe it assumes. I don't think PSR is really deployed explicitly, but I don't want to. I'm not sure it necessarily assumes it. I don't know. I've not really thought about it whether the Kalam cosmological argument requires principle of sufficient reason. I think it may do. Maybe, but it's very plausible because why else would we be thinking that there has to be an explanation, right?
Right. Right.
But you can, without mentioning the semantics of PSR, I think you can still have a conversation about it. And I think, yeah, the empirical argument is just that for all of our observations, all of our science, all of our worldly knowledge, things that we've empirically noticed and learnt about, there are causes behind events or effects. There's cause and effect, right? The water, how does water come about? How do children come about? Where do trees come from? Each one has a cause, at whatever level we define it as, right? You can say to some extent causation, identifying causation is a little bit arbitrary. It's based on our social constructs, right? Like if somebody goes and slaps somebody in the face, we would say the cause behind that was maybe Michael was angry, right? And that's because on a social level that makes sense. Whereas a neuroscientist may say that C nervous fiber fired a electrical impulse down the arms and it caused, that's from another level of analysis.
So,
right.
How micro you go or how macro you go in terms of causation. That's one of the topics.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what Alex was kind of also thinking about as well, wasn't he? He's saying, like, what is an event? What is a cause? What is an effect?
Right.
At what point? And I think his point would have been there isn't any. We don't actually see any causation. I think that's what he would lead up to. We don't see an events. Universe is just one event.
Right.
Right? Because we arbitrarily slice things up into sections.
Right. Totally.
Right? And we say, oh, this caused that and that caused this and this. When in reality maybe there wasn't any multiple causes. There wasn't a
there are no discrete causes. It's just one seamless cause, a single cause.
And that could possibly tackle the empirical argument. That can probably possibly tackle the empirical argument, which is making from observations that everywhere we look, we see causation. Where we don't, if Alex goes down that route, we don't see causation. We just maybe the only cause that we see is the very thing that you're trying to assume, which is the universe has a cause, which is something that we don't see. Right? Therefore, there isn't any causation. We just maybe that's a difficult thing to fathom for a lot of people. Very counterintuitive to say there's no causation.
Yeah, I mean, this you'll have to assume the thing that you're trying to prove, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, because you're trying to say everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, nothing really began to exist because.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you see if you give up the notion that because we arbitrarily, forcefully slice things up into events when there isn't any events. Yeah, there isn't any effects. There isn't any causes. So that does away with the empirical argument. Maybe that's his approach, perhaps, and it's a very interesting thing to say. And Craig has a second argument, which is the metaphysical argument. That if something can just pop out without any causation, then you have to accept that nothing. No. He says something can't come from nothing. Yes. So this is the metaphysical, and this is nothing to do with empirical observations anymore. It's more to do with the fact that it's a logical contradiction or metaphysical absurdity, right? That without any cause, from nothing came something, right? But nothing has no potential, nothing has no properties, nothing has no capability to do anything. So how can from nothing come an effect? If it had the potential for the effect to come, then it wasn't nothing. Can you see that? So at that point, you have to say there must have been something. And if you say something, there must have been something, you've already accepted the first premise that everything that begins to well, not just the first premise, but the second premise as well, that the universe must have begun to exist, right? I'm not sure it necessarily adds to the first premise, but I think it could. Everything that, but no, it wouldn't substantiate everything because we don't know about everything here. It's just making the point. It won't support the notion of everything. Wait, actually, no. Sorry, I misspoke. It would support the notion of everything because it would be a very strong argument saying that it's impossible, metaphysically, logically impossible for something to just happen without a cause. So therefore, everything that begins to exist has to have a. Can you see? And I think the metaphysical argument is more stronger right? Because even amongst us, we accept the fact that nothing can't exist. So if we're saying that,
I don't think I'm as strongly inclined to believe that nothing can't exist, right? I mean, we did. I think Kylie and I spoke about that in our last stream as well. I think anybody who's curious about that, I think the very first episode of this channel, Philo Sapiens, that Mahadan and I did together, that was back in April 2023. I think we did talk about nothingness, and maybe since that, I don't know how bad or good that episode was. That was our first episode, but we did discuss all these things about nothingness, and my opinion probably may have changed a little bit from that point on. I mean, I think it seems so highly unlikely that nothing can't exist, because we live, and asking that question is pretty much, I would say, is absurd, because we just don't live in a world where we can even ask that question, because live in a world where there is something existing already. Can you conceive of something not existing? It seems unfathomably hard to imagine. But you know, weird concepts take place pretty much, right? I think we did talk about it as an absurd concept at that point, and we said, even if talking about it as not existing, nothing can't exist. We are even talking about something that at least conceptually exists, right? So yeah, I think I would refrain from saying anything
yeah,
for or in favor of that. I mean, for or against that concept.
mm,
Anyway, so where were we? I think we digressed a little bit. Uh,
yeah. Before we
one more thing I
move back
wanted to
on,
point out. Yeah, one more thing I
on,
wanted to
go on,
point. Yeah, yeah. Just
go
one
on, go on, go
small
on.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So just small point that whenever we talk about everything that begins to exist, I think what is that begins to exist? Because what we see is a recomposition of the same atoms, same whatever that fundamental thing you might want to talk about, the quarks, the energy, the electrons, the quantum field, or however you want to call it. There's nothing that's beginning to exist. I mean, those fundamental things, if you want to call it that way, they don't begin to exist. They just transform from one state to the other, and that's how, from an observer's perspective, things begin to exist. But nothing fundamentally has changed. Basically, the thing that was there is still there, pretty much. So that's another objection. Probably it's not as strong an objection, but it's still there at least. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's very similar to the point of there isn't any um, cause, maybe. Well, it doesn't say that. I think you can still believe in the idea that things are changing, right? But without any, I don't know actually. Um, if we do away with the idea that nothing is beginning to exist, we're just recomposing matter to one form to another. Even that, I think you can say it shows that something does begin to exist. It's the new composition of matter from another state, right? Can you see
Right.
that?
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, then William Lane Craig's point still goes through on the empirical point, because he when he refers to the empirical experiential data of things coming into existence, the tree formed from the seed, you know, or water formed from H2 or hydrogen and oxygen molecules combining, right? He doesn't necessarily need to believe that nothing began to exist because the things were just there. He doesn't need to give up that concept. You can still embrace the concept that no, it's something did begin, because whilst the stuff was still there, it the new arrangement is something that began to exist, and that didn't. And why did that happen? Why did that change happen in the universe? Why did the hydrogen and the oxygens combine together? Well, there must be a reason, and that reason is um, something to do with the chemistry, something to do with the weather, something to do with the Earth's atmosphere. You know, whatever the whatever the causation behind water is, I think his point will still go through. Basically, if the composition, I'm hearing that apparently my internet is not working properly. I'll let
Yeah, Martin, it seemed like your voice was breaking up a little bit.
Okay, let's try again. So my point is, even if you just accept that there's energy transitions and transformations from one composition of matter to another, that new composition of matter would be a beginning or something coming into existence. Now, you may dispute nothing has come into existence, rather things, the arrangement of its existence changed. But William Lane Craig can just touch onto that and say, why did that change happen? Because there must be, because his fundamental point is that there has to be a cause. And his core, and he can still make that point because we all accept that it didn't transform from one arrangement to another arrangement out of nowhere, right? It was because of this, and then it was because of that, and then it was because of that, right? Maybe he can still make that argument.
But then I think the problem I have with that response is that then this whole argument just fails straight away, because then what are you arguing for? The universe has a cause, and then you just can't say that cause has to be, something different. I mean, you can just keep going on with that cause up until wherever you want. It doesn't need to have an end, right? Universe has a cause. That thing that caused it has a cause, and then you get into that.
Well, that will be accepting the idea that things have causes, or things that begin to exist have causes. Yeah. Then you're moving on to a different argument, which is to defend the idea of infinity. But you would have ended up accepting the premise to do so.
But then no.
Yeah.
You haven't. I mean, you have arbitrarily picked a point to say that things that begin to exist have a cause, right? Because your limit of what a thing is arbitrary, right? So somebody could say just universe has a cause. The same point that we were discussing, because universe is a thing, but that's the same circularity that we were talking about.
Yeah. So exactly. So I think Alex's point would have been, because he's expressed it elsewhere, and he's not going to express it here properly. Maybe he was loading up to it and we stopped it. But his point would have been that there isn't anything that begins to exist, because when you see one transformation of matter, then you see another transformation of matter, and that's ultimately all of those things were already there. So nothing began to exist. It didn't begin to exist. It was just there. That's his point. What I'm trying to say, sure, the matter was always there. Therefore, matter was always there from the Big Bang, right? Therefore, nothing came into existence after that. The only thing that came into existence would be the matter, the original matter, right? But if the original matter came into existence, and we assume that it must have come into existence from something, because everything that begins to exist must have a cause, then we're begging the premise, right? Because we can't give the original matter as the example for supporting the first premise, because that is the point of the first premise, which is everything that begins to exist. So it'll be circular. I think that's his point. And what I'm saying, that maybe William Lane Craig can get around that by actually saying that the matter was always there, but the changing of the matter from one state to another wasn't always there.
No, but
Can you see that?
that's the thing. See, that's the objection is not the changing of the matter. Everything that begins to exist, like, so you're talking about thing, right? You're not talking about a change.
Yeah.
And then the question is, what do you mean by
exactly?
By
well, yeah, that's
exist?
So exactly. Maybe it becomes murky, but maybe William Lane Craig can say, do you genuinely believe that when an hydrogen atom and an oxygen atom is unbounded, and they come together, yeah, that there hasn't been a change somewhere, right? Of
No,
course, there's been
change for sure, but then
yeah.
it didn't begin to exist, right? I mean, in what sense then that's the arbitrary limit
Yeah.
that we are
So
placing on.
yeah, exactly.
That's
What began? Yeah, what began?
Yeah, I think Madin, you muted yourself. Not sure if that's on. Okay. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna come back to Madin. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on this? Kelly, are you back? Okay. All right. What we're gonna do is we're gonna move on with the discussion.
Why was I just talking about it?
I wanted to. There's two things at the big.
Time. I'm not convinced, in other words, that. Why did I bring up general relativity? Why was I just talking about it?
I wanted to. There's two things at the beginning. What you were saying.
Why was I talking about
I
it?
don't know. I've just,
Johnny
got here.
Johnny would have known. Johnny, are you listening?
Johnny's not with us
I
anymore.
can't remember where I was going with that.
Johnny's in a cupboard. Johnny's in a cupboard somewhere.
If I don't jump into this
But please, yeah,
conversation,
let's have it.
soon I'm going to forget
Yeah.
all that's been
Can
said.
I remind just two things at the
Oh,
beginning?
sorry. A theory and B, just really quickly. A theory and B theory. Very simple. If the past does not exist, as Dr. Craig believes that it does not, the only thing that really exists is the present moment, then to say that the past is an actual infinite seems at least not obvious to me. The future doesn't exist. The future is a potential infinite because you keep counting into the future, on and on and on and on with no end. There's no point at which it's completed and exists as a whole. That would be an actual infinite, and that would be paradoxical. But it doesn't exist yet. Now, it's complicated by the fact that the past sort of has already existed in the past, but it doesn't exist right now. If the past doesn't exist, it seems strange to me to suggest that we can count it as this sort of boxed off thing that we can point to and call an actually infinite sort of set of things.
All right, just checking if everybody is there. Kelly, are you there?
I am. I don't know if Kelly is there.
Yeah. All right. Were you done, Martin, with
Yeah, I'm
all the-
saying, yeah, I was trying to say that maybe William Lane Craig can still shoehorn the concept of beginning into the concept of change, right? Because a change is a beginning of some sorts, right? The second point I would say, let's say that is unsuccessful.
then it's an
Then it's just a
arbitrary-
language. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a language thing.
Yeah.
Let's say that is unsuccessful. We should still represent William Lane Craig's fundamental point at the most highest charitable way possible. Right? And if we need to change everything that begins to exist as a cause to everything that changes as a cause, you know, or everything that
Right.
changes has some other changing force behind it,
Right.
right? Or something like that. Maybe we can.
Yeah, everything that changes
Yeah.
has a change, has a force behind that change.
Or something like that. Yeah. Then it still goes through, I think, and it still plays a role. Yeah.
No, but then how would you take that to universe? Basically, now would you say that universe began to change?
Therefore the universe. So everything. Well, I'll have to think about how you can word this. Everything that everything.
See, this will be
everything-
garbage pretty much.
Everything that you could say everything that begins to change has a cause.
No, there is no beginnings to change. Everything that changes has a cause, right? I mean, there is no beginning or change. I mean, I don't know.
I'll have to
think
sit down.
through it. We'll have to
We'll
think
sit
through
down,
it.
but I'm sure William Lane Craig can. I think there is a way into that. I'll have to
Yeah,
think about it.
maybe there is a way to steel man it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's go through it again.
In other words, I don't know what a moment is. I don't know why an actual infinity is necessarily contradictory. And even if it's deeply unintuitive, sometimes in unusual circumstances, we're asked to abandon our intuitions. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the case of the infinity, this would be one of them.
Two things in there I think important, Bill. One is Alex gave a sort of Zeno's paradox sort of thing when you were saying, I don't know what a moment is, and you can sort of keep breaking it up into little parts.
Yes.
That's one sort of infinity argument. And the second one was, does it make sense to have an infinite chain that expands the other way? And so do you want to say something like, is time isn't infinitely divisible? And second, how do you explain if there is an infinite chain? Do you want to say there's a first cause to that as well? How do you explain the infinite chain?
Well, I think it's more important, Jack, to back up and assess the accuracy of Alex's summary of the arguments, because I think a lot of the quibble here is merely semantic rather than substantive. Now, as Alex correctly suggested, the most controversial premise of the Kalam cosmological argument is the premise the universe began to exist. And in support of this premise, I offer two philosophical arguments, which Alex distinguished, but perhaps not clearly enough. The first one is based upon the impossibility of an actually infinite number of things. While the concept of actual infinity seems to be a perfectly consistent mathematical concept, once you try to instantiate that in the real world, it results in all sorts of, I think, truly intolerable situations that suggest that an actually infinite number of things can't really exist. The second argument is independent of that first argument. It doesn't deny that an actually infinite number of things can exist, but rather says that an actually infinite number of things cannot be formed by successive addition. And this is the connection with the Zeno's paradoxes that you mentioned, Jack. The version of Zeno's paradox is called the dichotomy. Says that before Achilles can cross the stadium, he has to cross halfway. But before he can cross halfway, he has to cross a quarter way. Before he can cross a quarter of the way, he has to cross an eighth of the way, and so on ad infinitum. The implication is that poor Achilles cannot even move, because before he moved any distance, he would already have to have moved half of that distance. And therefore, Zeno concluded that if reality is made up of these sorts of intervals, that motion is impossible, which is absurd, because obviously motion exists. Now, this version of the Kalam cosmological argument is just like the dichotomy paradox, except you pull out the initial point, because Achilles has a starting point, but an infinite past, as incomprehensible as this seems, has no starting point. So you just mathematically pluck out that initial point and push it back to infinity. Instead of descending intervals like 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, you make all the intervals equal, and they go back to infinity without beginning. And that does nothing to suggest how that infinite past could have been traversed one interval at a time. Now, Alex, you asked, well, what are those things that are traversed? And I interjected their events. And in my work, I discuss this. What is an event? It's a type of change. And to make sure that all of the events are actual and equal, we arbitrarily, conventionally specify some chosen event as our standard event, say 1 hour or 1 day. And then we ask, how many standard intervals are there in a beginningless past? And the answer can only be an actually infinite number of such events. And these events don't all have to exist at the same time. These events have been instantiated in reality, like a falling series of dominoes. That's the analogy I also like. A falling series of dominoes. The last domino falls today, but there was never a first domino. It's been beginningless. And so you can specify a certain standard event arbitrarily and then ask how many have elapsed, and the answer will be actually infinite. So that would suggest that an actually infinite past cannot elapse. Now, you're quite right, Alex, in saying that Aristotle nevertheless believed in an eternal beginningless universe, but he said the past is not actually infinite, but potentially infinite. But here I think Aristotle was clearly conceptually mistaken. An actual infinite is a collection which is complete. All of its members are in that collection. But a potential infinite is a series that is at every point finite, but indefinitely increasing toward infinity as a limit, which it endlessly approaches, but never arrives at. So if the series of events in time is endless and will go on forever, the series of events later than any moment in time would clearly be merely potentially infinite. New events are added with each successive moment, but you never arrive at an actual infinity of events. By contrast, if you look at the series of events in the earlier than direction, that cannot be potentially infinite, because in that case, the past would be finite, but growing toward infinity in a backward direction, which contradicts the forward flow of time. So I don't think that those answers to the Kalam cosmological argument are at all convincing. Now, in addition to these two philosophical arguments, I was stunned to discover in my work at the University of Birmingham, in my doctoral work, that there are actually two scientific confirmations of the beginning of the universe. And notice the terminology I use there. Scientific results are always provisional. They're never certain. But we have these good philosophical, metaphysical arguments for the finitude of the past. And what contemporary science does is it confirms those arguments. That is to say, the hypothesis that the universe began to exist is much more probable, given the contemporary evidence of astrophysics, than it was without it. And so this is not refuted, Alex, by the survey you mentioned, where the scientists said that the Big Bang refers to this early hot dense state, not to the initial singularity. That's a merely semantic point. That is just saying that the label, the Big Bang, that label is given to this earlier hot dense state. It's not the label of the singularity, and that's quite true. But that isn't to deny the reality of the singularity or to say that it didn't occur. Hawking and Penrose, whom you mentioned, in their 1996 book, state, and if I can quote from memory, today almost everyone believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning in the Big Bang. So the finitude of the past, let me now add an additional point, doesn't require a singular beginning in the universe. Hawking and Hartle, James Hartle of University of California, Santa Barbara, offered a quantum physical model of the universe that resolved the singularity. They were able to round off that initial space-time segment of the universe so that there is no singular.
Kelly, you back? If you're saying anything, Kelly, we can't hear you because you're on mute. All right, yeah, I don't know. It's Martin, you want to add something? Because this has been going on for quite a bit, right? So, no, I think, see, I'm not finding a way in there to interject. There are quite a few issues.
Well, he's mentioned a few things there. William made some big points there. Starting from reverse, he's actually made a statement about cosmology, that actually that the science does, the best science does suggest that the time and the universe began. So that's a point to dispute. I think that's something that you would like to dispute at least, right?
Yeah, that's where I mean, two things I would have covered, like the physics side of it or the science side of it. But even before that, I wanted to get into this causal principle, right? Which is, everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? And then this is the premise one that we are talking about. Now, that P1 or this premise one is plausible for intracosmic events, right? I mean, this might seem like a very trivial point that I'm trying to make over here, that, this is plausible for intracosmic events because that's the experience that we have for anything that begins to exist has a cause, right? We do see, and I think we did dispute, Madin, or at least discuss that what should be considered a beginning or not. For the sake of argument, let's grant it whatever we see that a chair begins to exist, or we see that a table begins to exist, right? Those sort of things. But this can be considered to be true for intracosmic events, right? Objects within space-time. But extrapolating that to the space-time totality, I think that commits composition fallacy, right? Causation, uh, as understood in physics, is a relation within a nomological framework. To apply it to the framework within itself, basically, for universe itself, is a category error, in my opinion, right? And then this was Russell's argument as well, pretty much, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the point I wanted to make. For the physics argument, right? I think that the jury is out there as to whether the time really began to exist or not, whether time reverses its sign once you reach to that whatever you call a singularity stage. I mean, juries out there. There are different camps who believe in different things. You'll read different kind of people.
But William, just before you proceed, but William Lane Craig saying time did begin to exist, and that is the best science. What do you think of that?
He's saying time did begin to exist, right?
Yeah, and he's saying
that's
that.
what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. There are different. There's the jury is out there on that, right? There are certain models that don't require time to have a beginning. It's just that time changes sign. For example, Carol Chen model, right? There is another model that is CCC. That's by Roger Penrose. Again, it doesn't require time to have a beginning, pretty much, right? So you'll find those in different camps where that might not be true. So there is no unanimity between scientists in saying that the time absolutely had a beginning. Which if you go back and listen to William Lane Craig, he has said in multiple occasions that time had an absolute beginning, space and time had an absolute beginning, but there is no consensus within the scientific community on that.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yeah, that's how I understand it as well. That there isn't a grand consensus, but William Lane Craig is trying to suggest that there is at least the best science suggesting that, in fact, the universe and time did begin, and he's sort of progress on that. I would like to see what Alex says about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Kelly, would you like to jump in? I think Kelly is probably has moved into a parallel world. See, okay, let's play this, and I'll try to get in touch with Kelly. I don't know, maybe he's saying something and it's not getting transmitted to us.
Point like a cone has. A cone has a point in which it cannot be extended. That's where the point is. A cone can be extended in the other direction. And the standard Big Bang model has the geometry of a cone. But the Hartle-Hawking model got rid of that initial point by rounding it off through the use of imaginary numbers for the time coordinate. So their model has a finite past, a beginning of the universe, but is singularity free. And so don't think that my argument for the finitude of the past, the beginning of the universe, on the basis of astrophysical cosmology or Big Bang theory, assumes that it has to be a singular beginning. There are plenty of non-singular models with beginnings. So that would be the first body of evidence, is this astrophysical evidence from the expansion of the universe. But then very quickly, the second scientific confirmation that I don't think you mentioned is the evidence stemming out of the thermodynamic properties of the universe. The universe on a large scale is simply a gigantic closed system, because on naturalism, that's all there is. And there isn't anything outside of it. So if it were infinite in the past, its entropy production should have increased and increased and increased, so that it would now be in a dark, dilute, and lifeless state. And since we are not in such a state, we know that the universe must have had a beginning in which it was in a low entropy state, extraordinarily low, and has since been increasing in entropy as it's endured. And this is called the past hypothesis.
So it would be in a state of heat death if it was the case. It was if
In
it was constant.
in pre-relativistic physics, this was called the heat death of the universe.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
but in relativistic physics, the heat death could be either cold or hot, depending on whether the universe will expand forever or will
It's death.
recollapse.
So hot or cold, it's not a good thing. Okay, that's
Right.
good. Alex, quite a bit for you to
Yeah,
go
let's say,
through.
I find with these discussions.
Well, you mentioned so much to
I know,
respond to,
this is
but
the problem.
you're right. We don't.
Yeah,
I
this is
do want to respond though to the point about metaphysical intuitions and the Trinity at some point.
That's important. We'll get to that perhaps. I also want to make sure that we have time to talk about the proactive case against God's existence, which is equally important to this discussion. But the Kalam is your ground, Dr. Craig. Yes, I was with a friend who was yesterday who smokes cigarettes, and I realized that if you want to give up smoking, all you have to do is just take the remainder of your tobacco and just smoke half of the remaining tobacco every single day, and that way you'll never run out. You'll never have to buy any more. Of course, constantly dividing in this sense has been problematic for thousands of years and has prompted lots of people to develop metaphysical positions on, for example, time being discrete. If you need, which is in fact true, to half the distance between here and here in order to clap, you have to half it first. You have to half it again. You have to half it again. Many people say that there therefore must be some kind of ultimately small kind of distance. But for our discussion, this would be an example of a potential infinite. We're constantly dividing. And as we well know, that infinite series can just be completed. You can prove that just by clapping your hands. Dr. Craig said that in order to define what an event is, you just sort of arbitrarily pick a moment of a sort of duration of time and just count how many of those there have been. For example, hours. But the point is that there is no such thing as an objective hour. There's no such thing as the length of an hour. I mean this seriously. When satellites were first sent into orbit around this planet, scientists of general relativity told the technicians and the companies that the clocks will literally run at a different rate because of the effects of Earth's mass on the ticking of time. And the government didn't believe them, and so the original satellites were sent up with two clocks. One which is in accordance with general relativity, and one which is in accordance with the sort of commonsensical view that time ticks normally for everybody no matter where you are. And guess who was right? It was the government. I'm just kidding. It was the scientists. Time doesn't tick consistently in this way. And so to sort of pick an arbitrary length of time, like an hour, and just say that that's something that will have gone on infinitely into the past, I just don't think that's how time works. And I don't think that, like, metaphysically speaking, to call that an event makes much sense. I mean, like, you said that the problem with Aristotle and his interpretation of the past as a potential infinite, this is a sticking point, I suppose. You can help me out here. I understand the idea that the future is a potential infinite because, well, it hasn't happened yet. But the past is an actual infinite because it has happened. But neither of them exist on your view. I mean, I, broadly speaking, am a B theorist about time, which, and I know you've said in the past, and I assume you still think is the case, if the B theory of time is true, the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't work, right?
I think that it's more difficult to put through on a B theory of time.
Can we remind the audience, I'm not sure if what a B theory of time is.
What Alex put his finger on is a very profound metaphysical issue about the nature of time that divides philosophers. The so-called or as I prefer now, the tensed theory of time, says that tenses like past, present, and future are objective features of reality, and that temporal becoming is real. Things really do come into being over time and go out of being. The tenseless, or B theory of time, says that our experience of tense is illusory. There is no objective difference between past, present, and future. Rather, this is a subjective feature of human consciousness. And similarly, temporal becoming is unreal. It is an illusion of human consciousness. All events in time are stretched out like a spatial line and are ontologically on a par. Now, in my original work on the Kalam cosmological argument, I just assumed the truth of the A theory of time because it seems so obvious.
Okay, just very small point, I guess, here, since, and I'm also gonna hide this because I don't want to get any strikes, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is William Lane Craig does say that, I'm not quite sure how he's saying that on B theory of time, Kalam would be hard to defend. I think it's going to be the fundamental concept of the premises of Kalam cosmological argument are not supported by B theory of time. There is no time. So how would you say begin to exist? Or universe began to exist, or everything that begins, the whole premises collapse. So I think by saying that it's going to be hard to defend, I think is an understatement. I think it just can't be defended. But maybe Martin, you can correct me if I'm thinking it incorrectly. I think
No, I
it's
think,
just
yeah,
impossible to defend, I guess. I mean, the whole premises just go away.
yeah. Possibly, yeah. I think it definitely defeats at least the sub arguments that are used to prove that you can't have an infinite regress, because successive addition goes out the window. It may still leave the problem of infinites there, because you still may have to grapple with the idea of infinity.
Right.
Right, you can have an infinite chain or something, and that might be impossible, but that takes a different direction. The Kalam cosmological argument will have to drastically change in order to deal with the B theory, I think. So in that sense, yeah, it does kind of strongly defeat it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
whether
think it's a very strong
mm,
defeater to that, pretty much.
I mean, can you still maintain the idea that everything that begins to exist has a cause when if you have a B theory understanding of time? Maybe you can. I don't know. Can you still defend the idea of the universe began to exist?
Very, very. I mean, see, I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have a concept of beginning, right? Because there is no tense. See, B theory is not a tense; it's a tenseless theory, right? So, any word that gives a sense of beginning of time or end of time, I think that's definitionally defeated, pretty much, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's not the only way Kalam is set up, is it?
Yeah,
So if
then
you
you
look,
set up a different. Then it becomes a.
no,
Then you
because
set up a different argument, right?
right, yeah. I mean, you still have the metaphysical argument for the first premise, and that would remain there, even if you demonstrate that there's a beer theory. Something can't come from nothing. Nothing doesn't produce anything. Things don't pop into just existence, right? That has nothing to do with whether it's B theory or A theory. Whether or not the block universe is true, we're saying did it pop into existence out of nothing, or something like that. That it might not defeat that if
No,
have
but then
it'll be
the
eternal,
question
right?
is,
The block
then
theory itself is
I
eternal,
think
right? So nothing popped into. Yeah,
you are assuming B theory of time, but when you ask about pop into thing or into existence, all those have a tensed connotation.
yeah, that's right. So it'll be the case if on a B theory of time, nothing would have popped into existence. So it'll just be
Yeah,
eternal.
everything is just there. That's about it. It's just being there. That's about,
So
you
yeah,
just can't.
let me retract a little bit. I do think it completely destroys Kalam actually, because I'm thinking out loud on my feed, and I do think it kind of destroys it, because if beat theory is true, then you literally have a very similar thing to a God model,
Yeah,
right? Everything. William Lane Craig tries to defend God against all the issues that Kalam raises about the universe by saying that God is entirely different. He's eternal. Yeah, he's static. There's no change. There's no movement. There's no time. There's no flow of time.
that's
Right?
exactly the B theory. That's exactly
Exactly.
how the universe is
Exactly.
B. Yeah,
Exactly. So if B theory is true, then it destroy, I think, almost everything about Kalam to
yeah,
smithereens. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
totally. All right, I think I'm not quite sure what's happened to Khali. Khali, are you back? Not quite sure. Maybe there is some issue with your internet or device, or there has been a severe thunderstorm in the Alabama state of Alabama, or wherever you are, Connecticut. I don't know.
I think
All
it was
right.
South Africa.
No, he was there 3 years back.
Or was it Mexico?
No, Mexico was probably maybe after that, I guess. All right, let's move on. Yeah, I think, see, this argument we have discussed so many times, that now I'm finding it, quite, I think we just, at least to me, I'm not getting any new ideas here, right? As to how can I refute it. I've been listening to, and so are you. I think all three of us have been listening to William Lane Craig for such a long time. I think it's been almost 16 years for me to have been listening, or more than even 16 years that I've been listening to William Lane Craig. And I find that the arguments have remained almost the same. Not much has changed. And then the refutations have almost remained the same in the last, 15, 14 years or so as well. So yeah, it's been, I think we're just going through, and I thought this would be interesting. Probably this is still is interesting, but it seems like we have answered each one of these pretty much, quite a few times in our previous streams. So yeah, it's as if, and even though I think that sometimes I feel that Alex's responses are not that thorough that I would have expected him to give. Probably, I don't know. Or maybe it's just he doesn't want to push really hard on whatever the responses to these arguments by William Lane Craig.
Mm.
Yeah, not too sure. Anyway, let's move on. Anything that we missed over here responding to, or maybe was there a point that we should have really responded to? I'm just trying to think.
I mean, Craig did mention something about infinities, and I think he challenged Alex's point of the unclarity of what an event is by saying he acknowledges that events are difficult to define, but then he goes to say exactly what I thought he was trying to say, that it doesn't matter how you define an event, you can't have an infinity. I think that's what he's talking about there, and
Right.
he counters the idea of events are made up of sub-events, and those can be subdivided, and that can be subdivided, and that can be subdivided. And he counters that by saying Zeno demonstrated that this is an impossibility to circumvent any, which is because he's trying to say that if the Zeno's paradox has various different formulations, but I can highlight it in my own type of way, which is if the man wants to run across the racetrack, he has to run across half. He has to make the first feet. He has to move the first feet, and if he has to move the first feet, he has to move the first half of the feet, and then the first quarter of the feet, and the first 1/8 of the feet, and 1/16 and 1/32, and it can go to infinity ad infinitum, just like William Lane Craig said. Therefore, he won't even move, right? And I think Craig's actually thinking that is a very coherent way of saying that this is a metaphysical impossibility. If indeed it was the case that you have an infinite number of subdivisions, then nothing will come into existence. So I think Craig's point is actually taking what Alex is saying and going, well, yeah, if that's true, then that's an impossibility as well. And therefore, that's not true, right? It can't be the
Right.
case. That can't be the case, because then we would, it strengthens his successive addition argument by saying the same thing in the end, which is that nothing will begin to start changing, or no event will come into existence. Clearly, the events have come into existence. Therefore, it cannot be the case that you have a Zeno's universe with infinite subdivisions. So he makes a
Right.
decent kind of point, and I don't know what to make of that. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I don't think Zeno's paradox necessarily is a good way of describing how things work in the universe. Like, there isn't a person, right? We're not talking about a person moving, right? Making that first step or something. If the universe is infinitely into the past, I don't think that's necessarily an issue. William Lane Craig makes the point that you can't come to the present through successive addition, and I've made this point before, and I think I see no problem with that if you just think about it differently, in the sense that William Lane Craig wants to think about it in the following way, where there's
I think Craig doesn't demonstrate that there's a formal contradiction here, and
he
unless
doesn't.
you do that,
Yeah.
it,
I mean,
he relies on absurdity, but not on a contradiction, I think. And
I mean,
that's,
even the absurdity of it vanishes when you think about it in the way I'm thinking about it, which is like you have a row of people, a row of people, and each they're all gods, and they all have to gain permission from the former to shoot their rifle. So each one relies on the former to get authorization, right? Well, would the one at the front ever, and you have an infinite series of gods, or would the one at the front ever shoot?
So is that a question you are asking? This is that version of paradox, right? But I think this case doesn't. So this case is not a symmetric case, or it's not a proper analogy to fit into the case that we are talking about. There is, when the past events cause a change of state in the universe, there is no going back. It's just coming forward, from back to forward, right? What you're saying is you're approaching past as you would approach a future, which is not the case that we are talking about. We are being approached by a past to current, and not that we have to traverse from current to past, as is the case in your guards example, right? So I think they are kind of a mismatch in that sense, that the whole analogy doesn't apply to that, right?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I kind of stopped for a moment, but I think I think just taking the analogy into account, even in the just forget applying it to the universe. If there's an issue with the analogy, that let's say we concede that there's an issue with the analogy, that the guards will never shoot. The first guard, the guard at the front will never shoot because there's an infinite number of guards behind him, each one waiting for the one previously former to receive authorization, because there isn't a first guard, so each one will be looking back, waiting, just keep going, and nobody really gets the permission, and
No, but
so it doesn't begin.
What if the there has always been a command coming
Well, that's
from?
it. That's how I was gonna. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. So
Yeah, I mean,
you just flip it a
you
bit.
don't have to posit that you're asking for a command, but that
Yes.
the command has always been traversing from.
Exactly. So if you think about, so we end up, it's a psychological issue. It's not a metaphysical issue. It's a psychological issue of how we think about it. If we're thinking about this chain of people, and we're just looking at it from, all right, God 13 is waiting for God. Sorry, yeah, God 113 is waiting for God 112. God 112 is waiting for God 111. God, then yeah, it doesn't begin. But why are we psychologically thinking about it this way, right? What if God 113? Because remember, these gods have been going on for infinity, and is existing for infinity and for infinite time. God 112 already told 113, 113 already told 114, 114 already told 115, 115, etc. Right?
Right.
And if you just think about it like that, then there's absolutely no issue anymore. All you have to now imagine is that each god has received permission from the one before it. There isn't any first god, but every single god, remember, it's an infinite chain of gods. Every single god on this chain has received permission.
Has been receiving.
The intuition might be, but there isn't a first one to say go. But that's who cares about that? Who cares there isn't a first one? Yes, there isn't a first one who said go. All of them said go.
Yeah, totally.
Wherever you go on the chain, forever, you'll find them saying go. Then you have a chain that's complete. And it will and it didn't start because there isn't a start to it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
been,
why I'm saying
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's why
yeah.
I'm saying that it's an asymmetric case. You can't juxtapose the current to future infinity case with past to current case, right? Both are different, right? You know, the future one, you can always say that it seems it's a potential infinity, and you probably can't achieve that actual infinity. But the past one is already an actualized infinity,
Yeah,
which has actualized and reached to
yes,
you, right? There's no
yes,
problem in assuming that way, and
yes,
that's probably true as well. So,
yeah. And going into the future, let's just think about going into the future now.
Mhm.
And let's say that instead of gods going into the past, we're looking back projecting into the past. We're thinking about future gods. I am one god. I am number one. You are number two, right? Kylie's number three, and then there's more gods ahead of us, right? Well, there's no issue there, right? Like, I'm gonna say go to you. You're gonna say go to Kylie. Kylie's gonna say go to somebody else, right? The issue that William Lane Craig would like to raise is that yes, that's fine, but as long as we call it a potential infinite, because there isn't, it's never going to be the case that you traverse an infinite. There's never going to be one single moment. Yeah, because wherever you stop on this chain, it will be a finite number
yeah,
at
yeah,
whatever
totally.
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we can accept that. Yes, wherever you stop on the chain, it'll be a finite number. But if it goes on for infinity, what would that be? Would that not be an actual infinite? Yes, right? It won't be a potential infinite. The only way, again, this is a psychological issue. When I say psychological, I don't mean mental illness, but it's how you think about it, but which is kind of all of philosophy.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
see, the thing is, and I do agree to that. It's probably a question of uh, treating infinity already as something that just can't be achieved, pretty much, right?
yeah,
And that's why you say you can't use a term you have achieved infinity, whilst you think you just can't achieve it. And then when
mm,
you say you have traversed infinity, and then there's no issue with traversing those many number of steps or counts or whatever you want to
mm.
call, then there's no problem, right? Then both the cases are similar, pretty much,
That's right.
coming
So
from
yeah,
infinity to
I mean,
current.
psychologically, we're always thinking in the present, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
psychologically, we're thinking that when am I going to reach? When is the present going to align with the reachment, the end state of infinity? Well, the present's never going to align with the end state of infinity. And
right.
the infinity doesn't have an end state. There will
Yeah,
always be a forever number left, right?
yeah. You
So
just can't achieve infinity. You
yeah,
you
in that sense, you can't, right? As a
Yeah, in that
present,
sense, you can't achieve
as
as
a
in,
present tense,
yeah,
it's a present
yeah.
tense.
I
But
mean,
if you
you
look,
can't achieve
if you, yeah,
as a
but if you,
destination. You can't achieve that. That's what I meant,
yeah,
basically.
as a destination, you can't. In a destination, you can't achieve it. But if it goes on for infinity, for infinite time, you will be at each point, right? You will be.
Yeah,
There
you'll
won't.
attain every point. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think. See,
there isn't going to be a point where you say I have done it.
yeah,
However, you will have been at every point.
yeah, yeah. But
So,
see, the
and
only way that you can make sense of it, when you say, if you traverse for infinite amount of time, you'll be in infinity. Basically, you'll achieve infinity in the sense, right?
yes, and that's not
Yeah,
like a one moment. It's
yeah,
all of the moment because infinity by definition is going through all of those moments.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there won't be a moment where you've achieved it. It
Right,
just goes on forever. Yeah, and that's what William Lane Craig wants to say. That is a potential, right? No, it's not a potential. The potential collapses into the actual. If it keeps going into the future, the potential eventually becomes an actual infinity. That's why all potential infinities are actual infinities, right?
right.
In principle, they're all actual infinities. It's just that when you psychologically think about yourself in the present state, traversing it, you stop yourself and you go, where am I now? Well, you're in a finite moment, and so that you're potentially going towards the infinity at every point, right? From the finite present perspective, you're always potentially going into the infinity. From a non-presentist type of outlook, the chain of events will always you will always the steps towards infinity will eventually amount to an infinity if it goes on for infinite time.
Right.
And in a universe where it's gone for infinite time, every single step would be stepped upon. And if that's the case, you have an actual infinity.
Right. All right, Madin. Yeah, I think we have gone deep into this video. I think more than we have traversed, not an infinity, but only 43 minutes so far. And let me show it to our dear audience as well. We have traversed quite a bit, 43 minutes into this discussion. So why don't we just hold it for today at this point, and maybe come back to it later some point, maybe tomorrow, day after tomorrow, or maybe next week. What do you think?
Maybe we can, yeah. How long have we been streaming for?
We've been streaming for about 1 hour 40 minutes roughly, but this has been an engagement discussion. I think we let the debaters talk a lot more than we did, and usually that's not the case. I think usually we talk a lot more than we listen to the whatever, or reviewing whatever the video is. So in that case, I think, but this was good. I think this whole discussion is very highly intellectually stimulating, at least, and I can speak on behalf of each one of us here. So I would like to come back to it as well, pretty much. Maybe cover the next.
It is so highly stimulating that Kylie went to sleep.
Kylie, are you there? Are you back? Or maybe I'm thinking maybe he's just so tired that he just went to sleep. Maybe so.
How could that happen?
We'll come to know. But anyways, yeah, I think this had been. I think I know even Kylie likes to talk about these concepts of time, and even though his favorite argument is contingency argument, but he does like to delve into these topics really deeply. All three of us, and so let's get back to it next time whenever, and we'll make sure that we'll have an extra cup of coffee. Buy me a coffee for Kylie.
Yeah.
All right then. Yeah. All right. So before we drop off, I think it's only fair for our audience to know that we have Hindi English channel as well. That's www.youtube.com/@philosapiens. And if you haven't subscribed to that channel, and if you speak in the Urdu, or like to listen to us deconstructing arguments by Dawa gangs, or mostly the Iman Union or Dawa gangs of South Asia, then do go to that channel. But otherwise, if you are here for the first time, like, subscribe, and share our channel. If you are financially able, and if you would like to support us, you have been listening to us, and if you feel that we produce some more decent content, then maybe you can consider us donating through Buy Me a Coffee. So you can go to buymeacoffee.com/philosapiens, or you can go to patreon.com/philosapiens. You can use various modes available on YouTube. That is, I think, super chat, super stickers, memberships, whatnot you have available over there. And the best thing you can do is just comment underneath. Keep commenting on the live stream chat as well. And then once the stream is over, keep discussing points in the comment section. And if you have any preference for any video that you would like us to review next time, maybe just throw that in as well, and engage with us as well. So you can always we always invite our audience to join and have a discussion with us as well, irrespective of whatever religion or you believe in, or whatever your worldview is. You're more than welcome to drop by and have a conversation with all of us. With that, before concluding, I would ask Martin if you have anything as a closing remark. Or
No, I don't. I think this is a long video, and it's a shame that we can't go through all of it. That's all.
yeah, I think we would love to cover the next half as well. But see, every time we say that, I think we said the same thing about Muhammad Hijab's video or lecture video as well, that will come and review all 3 parts of it, or 2 parts, how many were there, and each one is probably 2.5, 3 hour long or something like that. And then we just found something new, and then we got on to discussing that new thing. And so I have this inkling that moving on, probably next week, if we do another stream next week, we'll find something else to talk about, which is probably gonna pull us more towards that, and we'll just probably slowly forget this one. So anyways, yeah, whatever happens, I think the next stream is always gonna be as engaging as this one. So with that, thank you everybody, and see you next time.